When we speak of talking to God, we are really speaking of one of the most ancient and universal impulses in the human heart. Across cultures, across times, across languages, people have felt within themselves a desire to reach beyond the visible, to lift their voices toward the unseen, and to pour out words, longings, hopes, and questions to the one they sense is greater than all. This act, sometimes quiet and hidden, sometimes ritualized and shared in community, sometimes wordless and silent, sometimes overflowing with passion and tears, is what people have always called prayer. And yet, the simple phrase, talking to God, carries with it both a sense of intimacy and a sense of mystery. For on the one hand, it sounds as simple as speaking to a friend, and on the other hand, it carries the awe of addressing the Creator of the universe. How do we bridge that paradox? How do we learn to truly talk to God? When you begin to reflect on this, you notice that talking to God is not like talking to any human being. With human beings, you expect a direct reply. You hear a voice, you see an expression, you read a body language. With God, there is a different rhythm. Sometimes the silence is deep, and yet that silence is not empty. It carries presence. Sometimes the answers come not in words but in circumstances, in sudden clarity, in the unfolding of events, or in the quiet conviction that settles on the heart. To talk to God, then, is not only about the words we speak, but about entering a relationship that allows for listening, waiting, trusting, and believing that communication is real even when it does not look like human conversation. Think of how a child speaks to a loving parent. There is no need for formal phrases or rehearsed scripts. The child simply speaks out of what is felt: hunger, joy, curiosity, fear, gratitude. And the parent, even if silent, understands. Talking to God can be just like that. It is not about impressing Him with eloquence or long speeches. It is not about reciting a list of memorized lines without heart. It is about allowing your inner self to become honest, naked, open before the one who already knows you better than you know yourself. If God already knows your needs, some may ask, then why speak at all? Because speaking transforms us. Speaking is the way we allow our scattered emotions to be gathered, the way we move from confusion to clarity, the way we affirm our relationship with the divine, not as an abstract thought, but as a living encounter. It is less about informing God and more about forming ourselves in God's presence. When you start to talk to God, you may feel hesitant. Some people think they are unworthy, too sinful, too broken. Others think they do not know the right formulas. Still others imagine that God is far away, too busy to listen to one individual voice. But all of these are misconceptions. To talk to God is to acknowledge that God is nearer than your breath, more attentive than the closest friend, more patient than any listener you will ever encounter. There is no disqualification. There is no time when He turns His face away from one who calls sincerely. The first step, then, is not technique but trust. The trust that God hears you, that God cares, that your words are not wasted in the air, but rise into the very heart of the eternal. Consider the ways in which people through the ages have spoken to God. Some have done it in formal prayers, written in sacred texts, prayers that have been repeated across centuries, words shaped by poets, prophets, and saints. Others have done it through spontaneous cries that rise without premeditation, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the midst of daily work, sometimes in crisis. Some talk to God in songs, lifting melodies that become prayers of the soul. Some do it in silence, letting their heart beat itself into the stillness, where God's presence is felt more than words can convey. Some write letters to God, journals filled with questions and confessions. Some walk through forests or sit by rivers, and let their awe of creation become a conversation with the Creator. There is no single method, because talking to God is less about method and more about authenticity. and yet to deepen the practice, to learn how to truly talk to God. We must also learn to balance honesty with reverence. God is not just a buddy to be chatted with casually. Though He is closer than the closest companion, He is also holy, majestic, beyond comprehension. Talking to God requires us to recognize this mystery. Just as one would not walk into the presence of a king without a sense of respect, so too in prayer we approach with humility. But this humility is not fear that freezes us into silence. It is a humility that makes our words sincere, that strips away arrogance. That reminds us we are creatures speaking to the Creator. It grounds us in reality, while it lifts us into relationship. Another dimension of talking to God is learning to listen. Many imagine prayer as a monologue, where we speak and then leave. But if you were to talk to a friend that way, never pausing to hear their response, you would not call that conversation. True conversation involves both speaking and listening. Listening to God is not always easy, because His voice does not usually thunder from the clouds. But it can be discerned in the quiet nudges of conscience, in the illumination of Scripture, in the wisdom that arises when you sit in silence, in the counsel of wise friends, and in the unfolding of providence in your daily life. To talk to God, therefore, is also to train your ears to listen differently, to hear the whispers behind the noise of the world. There are times when talking to God flows naturally, when gratitude fills you, when joy overflows, when the beauty of life compels you to say, "Thank you." In those moments, prayer is easy. But there are also times when words feel stuck, when pain silences you, when anger at life makes you feel distant. What then? Even then, talking to God is possible. Sometimes all you can do is groan or cry, and those groans and tears are themselves prayers, raw and real. Sometimes all you can do is sit in silence before God and say nothing. But your very silence is a kind of speech, a presence offered to the divine presence. Sometimes you may even speak your anger to God, your confusion, your doubt. And far from being rejected, those words are welcomed, because God desires truth in the inward parts, and nothing is more truthful than voicing what you genuinely feel. He is not fragile. He can bear your questions, your struggles, your storms. To talk to God is also to learn the rhythm of persistence. Imagine someone who asks once, and then gives up if no answer comes immediately. Would that be a real conversation? Talking to God sometimes means continuing to ask, continuing to seek, continuing to knock, even when heaven feels silent. It is in this persistence that faith is tested and strengthened. Through the very act of continuing, your soul grows in patience, in trust, in endurance. You learn that prayer is not a vending machine, where you press a button and instantly receive. It is a relationship, and relationships are built over time, through presence, through perseverance. Another beautiful aspect of talking to God is that it transforms how we talk to ourselves and to others. When you make it a practice to bring your heart honestly before God, you begin to see yourself more clearly. Your fears are named, your desires examined, your hopes purified. You are less likely to deceive yourself with illusions. You are more likely to grow in compassion toward others, because you recognize that the same God who hears you hears them as well. Talking to God makes you more attentive, more patient, more empathetic. It creates in you a wellspring of peace that can flow out in your words and actions in daily life. Some might ask whether talking to God really changes anything in the world. Is it not just a psychological exercise, a self-soothing ritual? But countless lives bear witness to the power of prayer, not only to change hearts but to shape history. People have found strength to endure persecution, courage to fight for justice, wisdom to make difficult decisions, healing in body and spirit, reconciliation in broken relationships, all through talking to God. And while not every prayer is answered in the way we expect, Every prayer opens us to the possibility of transformation. Sometimes the change happens not outside, but inside us. And that change then ripples outward into the world. It is also worth remembering that talking to God is not confined to moments set aside as prayer times. While it is good and necessary to have dedicated times for focused conversation with God, talking to Him can happen anywhere, anytime, in the midst of ordinary activities. You can talk to God while walking down the street, while washing dishes, while driving, while working. The more natural this becomes, the more you realize that prayer is not just an occasional act, but a way of living. Your whole life can become a dialogue with God, a constant openness to His presence, a rhythm of gratitude, petition, confession, and praise woven into the fabric of your days. Over time, as you talk to God consistently, you may notice that your language shifts. At first, you may come with many requests, long lists of things you want. But gradually, you may find yourself more often saying, "Thank you." You may find yourself more willing to say, "Not my will, but yours." You may find that prayer becomes less about bending God to your desires, and more about bending your desires toward God. This is a sign of maturity, a deepening of relationship. Just as in human friendships the conversation moves from needs to shared presence, so too with God the conversation becomes less transactional and more relational. Another dimension of talking to God is acknowledging mystery. There will be prayers that seem unanswered, cries that echo in silence, situations that remain unresolved. And here is where faith is stretched. Talking to God means daring to believe that even when you do not see, even when you do not understand, you are still heard, still loved, still held. It means trusting that God's wisdom is beyond yours, that His timing is not your timing, that His purposes sometimes unfold in ways hidden to your eyes. It is in these seasons of apparent silence that the act of continuing to talk to God becomes an act of profound faith, a declaration that you believe in His goodness, even when circumstances seem dark. Think of the stories of those who have walked this path before us. They remind us that to talk to God is to enter into a tradition that spans generations. Prophets have cried out for justice. Kings have begged for wisdom. Mothers have prayed for their children. Soldiers have whispered for courage. Prisoners have sung hymns in the night. Ordinary people have lifted their voices in kitchens and fields, in deserts and mountains, in cities and villages. Their conversations with God have shaped their lives and, in turn, shaped the world. And today, when you talk to God, you stand in that same stream, adding your voice to the chorus of human longing and praise. It is important to remember, too, that talking to God is not about perfection. You do not have to wait until your words are polished or your thoughts are orderly. You do not have to wait until you feel worthy. Begin where you are, with the words you have, with the heart you carry. Speak as you can, not as you think you should. Over time, the practice will shape you. Your words will deepen, your heart will open more fully. But the beginning is always the same, a simple reaching out, a simple trust that you are heard. And perhaps, as you grow in this practice, you will find that the line between talking to God and living with God begins to blur. Your conversations become not only moments of speech, but a continual awareness of presence. You begin to sense that you are never alone, that even in your silence God is near, that even in your confusion God is listening. You begin to see your whole life as a dialogue, each day as a chapter in a long conversation that stretches beyond this world into eternity. So how do you talk to God? You talk as a child to a parent, as a friend to a friend, as a creature to the Creator, as one who is small to the one who is infinite, with honesty, with humility, with trust, with persistence, with gratitude, with openness to listen as well as to speak. You talk to God not because He needs your words, but because you need His presence. You talk to God not because it changes His heart, but because it changes yours. You talk to God not only when life is smooth, but when it is rough. Not only when you have plenty, but when you are empty. Not only when you feel strong, but when you are weak. And you keep talking through joy and sorrow, through light and darkness, through life and into death, because this conversation is the very breath of the soul. To speak to God is to acknowledge that you are not alone in the universe, that your life has meaning beyond itself, that there is one who listens, one who cares, one who invites you into communion. It is to enter into a mystery that is at once tender and profound. And the more you talk to God, the more you realize that He has been speaking to you all along. In the beauty of creation, in the stirrings of your conscience, in the words of sacred writings, in the life and love you receive each day. The conversation is not one you initiate, but one you join, for God has already spoken in countless ways, and your talking is a response to His eternal invitation. And so, let us remember that the way to talk to God is not locked behind rituals inaccessible to ordinary people, nor is it reserved for the spiritually elite. It is open to all because God is open to all. Begin where you are. Speak from your heart. Listen with patience. Trust with courage. And know that every word, every silence, every sigh, every tear that you lift toward heaven is heard, is treasured, is received by the one who loves you beyond measure. This is the heart of prayer. This is the meaning of talking to God. And this is the invitation extended to each and every one of us, today and always.